You remember the sound of the adult parties downstairs? The muffled bass of the stereo shaking the floorboards of your childhood bedroom? While the house filled with smoke and strangers, you weren't hiding under the covers in fear, but sitting quietly in the closet. There was a singular, heavy comfort in the way the coat smelled of winter and the way the door muted the chaos. You didn't crave the attention of the laughing people in the kitchen, you craved the structured silence of your own small space. To an outsider, you looked like a lonely child avoiding life, but you were actually doing something very different. You were running toward peace, building a world inside your head that was far more vivid than the one outside. This wasn't a retreat from reality, it was the early formation of a highly active internal world. Research now calls this high internal self-presence the ability to feel more connected to your inner landscape than your outer environment. Fast forward 40 years, and that closet has become a quiet home. But the psychology remains exactly the same. You don't need the loud excitement of a crowded street to feel the electricity of being alive. You can stare out a window at a gray sky, sipping a warm drink, and feel a sense of fulfillment others chase in airplanes. Your heart doesn't beat faster in the noise of a crowd. It beats steadier in the rhythm of stillness. But growing up in a world that rewarded the loudest voice, you probably didn't always see this as a gift. Like many of us, you likely spent your 20s trying to match the frenetic energy of friends who loved constant movement. You forced yourself into loud bars, nodding along to conversations you couldn't hear, draining your battery just to appear normal. You tried to fit a square peg of solitude into the round hole of a society that equates busyness with importance. Somewhere along the way, perhaps after a burnout or a quiet realization on a Sunday morning, something shifted. You realized that your calm was not a flaw to be fixed, but a feature to be protected. You stopped apologizing for leaving early, and eventually, you stopped apologizing for not going at all. I remember the first time I truly understood this. I thought staying home meant I was missing out on the story. You discovered that you didn't need the validation of a crowded room to feel significant. Instead, you felt deeply understood by the quiet space around you, as if the walls themselves were listening. You realized you didn't need noise to feel alive. In fact, the noise was often what made you feel numb. You didn't need everyone's eyes on you to feel seen. You needed to see yourself clearly first. You began to value the sound of turning pages more than the sound of polite applause. That is when you understood that peace is not just a lack of conflict, but an active way of living. Staying home does not mean being alone. It means being in the company of your own mind. Sometimes it means simply sitting still and truly listening to thoughts that others drown out with podcasts and playlists. This is a skill the busy world has forgotten, terrified of what they might hear in the silence. There is a unique trait shared by people like you, a deep current of introspection that runs beneath the surface. For you, every small moment, the steam rising from coffee, a shadow on the wall becomes a story. Every memory isn't just a file in your brain. It is a lesson you turn over and examine like a rare coin. You feel emotions fully. Joy isn't just a fleeting spark. It becomes something rich and textured. Sadness isn't something to rush through or medicate with distraction. It becomes a form of art. You take the time to understand the architecture of your own feelings, while others are just renting space in theirs. Scientific studies confirm that this solitude breeds high creativity, empathy, and emotional intelligence. Your calm allows you to understand people better, even if the world often fails to understand you. But sometimes, the world doesn't just misunderstand. It mislabels you with words that sting. You're missing out. You should socialize more. Or the worst one, don't you get bored? These phrases imply that by being a homebody, you are somehow incomplete, a puzzle missing its final piece. Yet, history reminds us that many of the world's greatest innovators didn't stand on stages. They stood in quiet rooms. They weren't refining their ideas in the middle of a cocktail party. They were refining them in the silence of their own company. Silence, you see, has its own form of communication, a frequency that only a few are tuned to receive. It teaches you patience, it teaches you observation, and it builds a kind of strength that doesn't need applause to exist. Still, a curious question remains. If home feels so safe, what exactly are you protecting yourself from? Sometimes, it is simply the sheer weight of the world's noise, the overstimulation that rattles your bones. People like you often feel deeply affected by the chaos of emotional unpredictability that floats in public spaces. Your nervous system doesn't crave a thrill, it craves a baseline of stability where energy can settle. Home gives you the one thing the outside world refuses to offer: control over your own environment. You can dim the lights, lower the volume, and finally let your guard down without looking over your shoulder. But here is the interesting part, the secret that nobody really talks about. You don't guard your time because you dislike people. You guard it because you value your energy. It is not an act of rejection. It is an act of preservation for the people who truly matter. You give your heart carefully to only a few people. Handing out access like a rare key, this isn't because you are cold, but because when you do feel, you feel everything with an overwhelming intensity. You know the high cost of emotional exposure, so you choose your investments with surgical precision. Sometimes, it is simply a preference, not a fear, not a barrier, and certainly not a story of avoidance. It is a conscious choice to spend time in a space that feels warm, familiar, and predictable. You have hobbies that don't require a ticket or a crowd: reading, restoring old furniture, or simply thinking. For you, joy becomes a quiet ritual, like brewing tea, rather than a loud celebration meant for an audience. You measure happiness in micro moments: the slant of afternoon light, the smell of rain rather than grand events. But here is the deepest secret, one you rarely say out loud because you don't think anyone is listening. You love deeply, you care quietly, and you notice absolutely everything that happens in a room. Because when you remove the static of distraction, the heart learns to focus like a laser. If you are someone who finds sanctuary in your own walls, you have likely felt the cold draft of being misunderstood. You might have questioned whether your personality is a glitch, something that needs a software update to fit in. You might have asked yourself if something is wrong, because you don't feel the thrill of the loud gathering. But what if nothing is wrong? What if the blueprint you were born with is exactly as it should be? What if the world is just loud, and it simply needs more people who know how to turn down the volume? People who listen before they speak, measuring their words like precious ingredients. People who think before they act, understanding the ripple effect of a single stone thrown in a lake. People who feel before they pretend, refusing to wear a mask just to make others comfortable. Let me shift for a moment from talking times about times you to talking times as times one of you. I once thought the world would forget me if I stayed in my room too long, that I would fade into the wallpaper. But then I noticed something remarkable happening in the silence I was so afraid of. The world inside my mind began to bloom, vibrant and wild, in ways the outside world never could. Thoughts grew like complex gardens, tangling and climbing in beautiful patterns I finally had time to see. Ideas kept me awake more than any late-night party ever could, buzzing with an energy that was entirely my own. I found meaning in the simplicity of my own space, a richness in the poverty of noise. And slowly, I realized that home is not just four walls and a roof. It is a state of mind. And now, I want to speak directly to you, the person watching this in the quiet of your room. Maybe you have always felt a little out of step, like a radio tuned to a frequency no one else hears. Maybe you enjoy your own company far more than the hollow buzz of a crowded bar. And maybe the world hasn't celebrated that part of you yet, making you feel small for needing space. But you know what? Your quiet is not a weakness to be fixed. It is a superpower to be harnessed. Your silence has depth, a bottomless ocean compared to the shallow puddle of constant chatter. Your solitude is a gift you give yourself, not a heavy burden you are forced to carry. If you stay with me a moment longer, there is something vital that still needs to be said. Because the truth is, people who love staying home are not running away from life. They are running toward it, living with a terrifying amount of intention and focus. They don't want to waste precious words on small talk about the weather or the traffic. They don't want to spend time on shallow experiences that evaporate the moment the night ends. They crave meaning, authenticity, and real connections, even if those connections are incredibly rare. Psychologists say that people who prefer solitude are often masters of self-awareness. They can recognize their own emotions with the clarity and precision of a diamond cutter. They understand exactly who they are, without needing a focus group or a trend to tell them. They know exactly what drains their battery, and exactly what nourishes their soul. Most people live their entire lives without ever really stopping to learn these things. But the homebodies? They learn this lesson early, often in the quiet, dusty corners of their youth. It doesn't mean they never get lonely. Loneliness and solitude are two very different roommates. Solitude is a choice you make to find yourself. Loneliness is the feeling of being lost without an audience. You can feel lonely in a crowded stadium, but you are never alone when you are at peace with yourself. Sometimes staying home is a shield against a world that demands a performance you are no longer willing to give. Other times, it is pure freedom, the absolute liberty to just exist without having to explain your presence to anyone. As the bridge generation, we remember the analog quiet before the digital world began its constant, frantic screaming. It is no wonder we crave the weight of a physical book or the slow rhythm of a record spinning. We remember when the world moved at a human pace, and staying home is how we keep that memory alive. Here's the part nobody talks about. Some of us love home because the world outside once broke our hearts. A betrayal or a moment where our emotions were too much taught us to build walls for our own safety. But within those walls, we stopped apologizing for the intensity of our feelings and finally began to own them. If you stay in to protect your peace, understand that it is not fear. It is a profound form of wisdom. You are not pausing your life. You are observing, healing, and becoming someone far more durable than before. Your inner circle may be small, but it is built on the bedrock of loyalty and genuine, quiet understanding. When you finally let someone into your space, they are not just a guest. They are part of your geography. You notice the sighs people hide and the strength in the pauses of a conversation that others simply talk over. This is self-companionship, the rare ability to sit with your own thoughts and feel completely and vibrantly whole. You aren't missing out on life. You are building a life that doesn't require a vacation to escape from. Drink your coffee slowly today and watch the shadows move across the floor of your own personal sanctuary. Keep protecting that internal pilot light, because the world only stays bright when people like you keep it burning. Stay home, stay quiet, and stay deep, because you are exactly where you were always meant to be.